Welcome, everybody. Um, this is the Chapter 3 lecture, which deals with the social self. So we'll start by talking about the sense of self. So the capacity for self-reflection is necessary in order to feel an understanding of our own motives and our own emotions, and even the causes of our behavior. And when it comes to this chapter and what we'll talk about throughout this semester, and what we kind of already hinted at least in the first chapter, is that the self, our sense of self, and our motives, our emotions, our behaviors, even our cognitions, are heavily influenced by social factors, particularly other people. So when we speak about the sense of self, we're often referring to three different components of the quote-unquote self. And these components are affect, so how we feel, and that includes how we feel about ourselves, our behaviors, and how we monitor and even augment or change our behaviors depending on social situations, and our cognitions. So when we speak about cognitions, these are our thoughts, but also our mental processes, including things like memory. And the ABCs of the self, when we think about cognition, this is going to stand out, particularly when we talk about memory and episodic memory. These are memories that are unique to us. They play a big part in terms of understanding who we are. We're often shaped by our memories and our past experiences. So this notion of the self-concept. The self-concept is the sum total of an individual's beliefs about themselves and their own personal attributes. So we're going to break the self-concept down into a number of different parts, including those ABCs of the self. Affect, I'll throw affect and motivation in there, behaviors and cognitions. So the sum total of those components make up us, our concept of the self, right? Who we think we are, who we feel that we are on the inside. An important part of the self concept is what we call self schemas, and self schemas are a belief people hold about themselves that help guide the processing of self-relevant information. So self-schemas are pre-existing beliefs that we have about ourselves, and any new information that we encounter, particularly if it involves us or is related to us in some way, we'll often process this new information as it relates to this schema that we have of ourselves, these pre-existing beliefs that we have. So we have a, let's say, a bias in terms of information, how we're going to process it, how it relates to us. We're going to try to fit that information into our self schema, these pre-existing beliefs. And when information does not necessarily fit into our self schema, it has the potential to cause something that we call cognitive dissonance. And that's going to be discussed in another chapter, but think of that word, dissonance. It has the potential to cause uneasiness. So we will actually shape and mold new information to kind of fit or go along with our self schemas. But for our purposes, we should know that self schemas help kind of guide the way that we process new information about us, essentially, right? So the self-concept may consist of many self-schemas. So people who identify with, let's say, two cultures may have different self-schemas for each culture. So if we have an individual who is, say, spent their childhood growing up in El Salvador, for example, and then migrated to the United States as a teenager, and now is an adult. They've been here. They've kind of integrated into our culture, to American culture. They might have two different schemas in terms of how they process new information about themselves, or information that's related to themselves in general. So when it comes to self schemas, you have to realize we might have different ways of processing depending on what kind of identities that we're taking on. Even say you, right? Even if you're American born, but maybe you're first generation college student from a working family, a working class background, let's say. You might have this schema about yourself and what it is to have that kind of life, and to have those kind of norms, and to have that type of culture. But let's say you go on from undergrad to graduate school, and then into a professional career. You might have this other schema related to this other part of your identity. And doing a little bit of projecting here, because that's exactly my my background, right? So there are elements or information or things that I learn or hear or discover about myself, and I might process them in different ways. So you can imagine, depending on different identities and different social groups that we might belong to, we might have different sets of beliefs about who we are, and those sets of beliefs might influence or affect how we process information about ourselves. Okay, so just realize that we could have multiple self-schemas. So ultimately, who are we? Who the hell are we, right? Well, really depends on who you ask, right? You're in a social psychology class, and I'm a social cognitive psychologist. For the purposes of this class, I'm going to say you're largely the product of your environment. But of course, there are plenty of people who have other opinions on who we are, right? Or how we come to be us. One perspective involves synaptic connections, that basically synaptic connections in the brain produce memory, and memory creates the sense of continuity that is needed for normal identity. And I don't disagree with that in the slightest. Episodic memories are a huge part of who we are, right? So when people suffer from amnesia, they don't forget how to read or how to write. They don't forget who the first president of the United States was. They don't forget, how to do basic math. They forget things related to themselves. They forget those episodic memories, those personal memories that make up their identity. So absolutely, there is a neurocognitive component to who we are. If we suffer traumatic brain injury, God forbid, right? That can very much change who we are, not just in terms of what we remember about ourselves, but also change our demeanor, change our personalities, if you will. Another approach to understanding or answering this question is that the concept of the self is really just an illusion that kind of emerges from childhood social interactions. So the concept of the self is changeable. It's almost like a shell, in a sense. Doesn't necessarily reflect who we really are. It just reflects the experiences that we've had at an early age. So you can just imagine a person who has experienced some really intense abuse early on in their childhood, and they might go into young adulthood or into adulthood with some behaviors and some thoughts and some emotions that might be not just unhealthy, but maybe even destructive. Does that represent or reflect who that person is? Or does it represent, say, products of really bad early childhood experiences? The same can go in the opposite direction. If you were given nothing but praise as a child, and you never really had to experience defeat or any type of criticism, maybe you will grow into early adulthood or into adulthood or even late adulthood, end of life, with a very different idea of say who you are. That might not actually reflect who you actually are, right? And you might say, okay, well, this kind of sounds all really philosophical. What's the point of this? Yeah, that is kind of the point of it, is that, the self, our self concept is really kind of just an illusion that is based on our early childhood experiences. I guess the good news is that we can change that. That means that the self is malleable, right? New experiences are able to change, who we are or who we think we are. I promise not to get that. Maybe 2 or 3 more times throughout the semester, I'll get that philosophical, but we'll try to keep it to the facts here. Yet another approach is that the self can be transformed or destroyed by damage to the brain and the nervous system. This is going back to the idea that we're really just a product of synaptic connections in our brains, and the case of Phineas Cage is a really good example of that. If you don't remember from intro, Phineas Cage was a railway worker, and by all measures he was a really charming person to be around. Really pleasant, good demeanor, happy outlook on life. He suffered a traumatic brain injury that should have killed him, but didn't. He survived. But he had a really large railroad spike go through the neck right here, up in here, and come out of his skull in the front up here. So basically destroyed the prefrontal cortex there. And he survived. But he wasn't the same person. He became really impulsive, really aggressive, and kind of just an asshole that people really didn't want to be around anymore. And when we think of it in that terms, again, I promise not to get too philosophical, but I'll do it a little bit. That's kind of scary. That our whole being, our whole sense of who we are, can be gone in an instant, right? Just a stroke can wipe out everything that we think we are, or what we feel that we are. That's why personally, again, sharing too much information because I'm talking to a computer screen, not actual people. I don't see any faces here, but it's why things like dementia, Alzheimer's, strokes, brain aneurysm, brain tumors, all that shit scares me almost more than anything. Just the idea that I would lose a sense of who I am, right? It's kind of terrifying in that regard. Okay, and finally, various self-based processes can be traced to activities in specific areas of the brain. So I'm not a big proponent of brain localization. I don't believe that we have certain memories stored here, certain memories stored there. That's not my understanding of the brain, and that's really not any one agree upon understanding of the brain. But yeah, certain parts of the brain are going to be responsible for different say components of ourself. We know that the prefrontal cortex, as I was talking about a moment ago, is largely involved in mood and executive functioning and creativity and planning ahead. We know that the amygdala is more responsible for the fight or flight response that we have. So things like anxiety, maybe even aggression, can be coming from that part of the brain. Different parts of our brain are responsible for language processing and visual processing and so on and so forth. But overall, the brain tends to work as a cohesive unit. So damage to parts of the brain can have physical, let's say, manifestations. So if you have a stroke on the left side of on the left side of your brain, you might experience some paralysis on the right side of your body. But that doesn't mean like certain memories are lost. I mean, memory, nobody really understands how memories are really even stored in the brain. So for more on that, take my cognitive psychology class during the summer. I feel like I'm going off on a tangent, so I'm just gonna skip ahead here. Okay, so the sense of self, a sense of being, of social being, right? A self-concept. Humans are not necessarily the only animals that are capable of this. From what the research shows, definitively at least, is that other great apes, like chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, bonobos, seem capable of self-recognition. And a big test of this is whether or not animals can recognize themselves in the mirror. So, if you test this out on your cat or your dog, they don't necessarily know that that's them in the mirror, right? They think it's another cat or it's another dog. If it's another dog, my dogs wanna play with it. They want to play with the image in the mirror. With my cats, they want to fight the other cat because that's cats and dogs. I love them both equally. But yeah, humans were basically, shaved apes, hairless apes. So we're primates, and it seems that other primates, or the great apes at least, are capable of recognizing themselves in the mirror. And some gorillas, in particular, who've been taught sign language, and are able to speak quite an impressive amount using sign language. Through those conversations, there's some pretty compelling evidence that they have a sense of self as well. Interestingly enough, some recent research suggests that dolphins and elephants might also be able to recognize themselves in the mirror, and that they too might have at least a fundamental understanding of a self-concept, right? Uh, Again, even this notion of a self-concept, even all the ways that I'm trying to kind of describe it, it's still kind of a conceptual variable. It's still kind of a construct, right? There's no real easy way to define it. Even like the most common definition, the sum total of our thoughts and emotions and behaviors. It's like, okay, what does that actually mean? It might be difficult to determine where a self-concept might begin or not. But again, if you're interested in that, we talk more about that in cognitive psychology, but you might also want to consider taking a comparative psychology class. One of the most fascinating classes that I ever taken. I took it as an undergrad, and if you're a person who really likes animals like I am, I think you would find it equally as interesting, hopefully, as I did. Okay, so we spoke about this idea of being able to recognize yourself in the mirror. So reflections in the mirror are often used as this test for self-recognition, or which is often seen as the first step or the first clear example that there's at least some concept of me, right? There's some type of self-concept that's there, that has developed. So even when we take a look at infants, really young infants, it takes a while for them to be able to recognize that the person they see in the mirror is themselves. So the self-concept might be something that takes time to build. One of the theories put forth as to why we don't really remember much about ourselves before the age of 5 is that we haven't yet, by age 5 is when we're really starting to get a clearer or more defined sense of self. Before the age of 5, we kind of see ourselves as maybe being an extension of our primary caretaker, usually our mothers. But by age 5 is when this is when children start experiencing separation anxiety. Again, the theory goes that, this is the age at which we're kind of able to form these episodic memories, because we now understand ourselves as separate entities with our own unique experiences. And that kind of scares the shit out of us, because that means mom is separate from us, which means mom can leave and mom can never come back, and we can be left all alone, right? Now, I'm sure my colleagues who teach developmental and child psychology will do a much better job explaining that than I did. But it's related to this idea that the self-concept might be something that kind of evolves, that we might need to have these unique types of experiences before we're able to form this kind of identity, this kind of sense of self. Okay, so cross-cultural research with humans challenges whether this is a valid measure of the self-concept. So again, when we take a look at a lot of the work that almost all of the research that we're going to be looking at in this class, we have to remember that it's coming from a Western, mostly the United States, a Western type of perspective. Now we're going to talk about cross-cultural implications of all that research, because a lot of the times the things that we take as existing, as being true, don't hold up when we examine it through a cultural lens. And we're in a social psych class, so that should make sense, right? Because fundamentally, social psych says that our actions, our thoughts, our behaviors are largely going to be determined by the environment, by the situation that we're in. So keep that in mind. Okay, so the self as a social concept. One thing that we do know, or that social psychologists at least will all agree on, is that the self is largely determined by other people, or at least our perceptions of what other people might think of us. Well, let's take a look at the different ways. There are several ways that other people help shape our self-concept, for better or worse. So the development of the self. Again, this occurs once we begin to see ourselves as a distinct entity in the world, some person, something that is separate from our primary caretaker. Also involve imagining what significant others might think of us and incorporating those perceptions. So in this regard, the self is what we call relational. So the self is going to depend on our relationships with other people, and not necessarily what other people think of us, but what we think other people think of us, right? So we might think we're horrible people, let's just say. We might think we're, a bad person because that's what we thought our parents thought of us. Our parents might not have thought that of us at all. Maybe the complete opposite. So it's not necessarily rooted in reality. It's rooted in our perception. Our perceptions tend to be, fairly accurate most of the time, except when they're not. And we'll see that more in the next chapter in terms of perceiving others and the other bias and all the different biases that we have. But yeah, there's this notion of the looking glass self. And the looking glass self is a way to understand the self-concept as relational, right? So we can think of, all the people who are part of our lives as being reflectors or being mirrors. So if this is us, if that's, say, me or you standing here, there's going to be all these people in our lives, and they're all going to, think different things of us, depending on the experiences that they had with us. So we see in this first mirror being reflected back at us, how my mom and dad see me. Say, if you're, grew up in a relatively healthy, stable family, childhood, they see you as an angel. You could do no wrong, right? You're the apple of their eye there. How your girlfriend or boyfriend might see you, right? There's no devil horns there or angel horns, so maybe something in between. How your older brother sees you, or say your older sister or sibling might see you in different ways. How your ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend or ex-partner sees you. Maybe they don't see you as such a great person, right? You can throw in there how your roommate sees you, your quad mate, how your professor sees you. All of those things are going to matter. And how a stranger might even see you, right? I'm saying that the people who are around us, who are all around us, they might not have a single unified, agreed upon image of who we are. And that's because we've had different experiences with these people. They've seen different sides of us. They've seen us in lots of different situations that have brought out different behaviors and emotions in us. But it's more about how we think these people see us, right? So if we think that our exes see us as horrible people, we might internalize some of that. Maybe our exes don't think this at all. Maybe they moved on. They don't care. They realize, we were young and stupid and it's all good. But we hold on to it. So maybe, that might explain why we sometimes need validation or some type of closure from people. Not necessarily closure because we're mourning the loss of a relationship. We might just need the validation, like, okay, so I'm not a horrible person, right? But, we don't always get that type of closure. So it's going to affect, who we are or who we think we are, right? So what are some ways that we come to kind of figure out who we are? How do we come to know ourselves? How do we develop this self-concept? Where does it come from? Well, one way is through introspection. Introspection is likely something that you've learned about in intro to Psych. It was actually a very early technique used by psychologists to try to understand the structure of the brain and the processes of the brain. People would spend hours and hours and hours introspecting and taking notes, essentially. Okay, so how is this brain structured? How are these memories connected? So on and so forth. So we do some of this ourselves, right? So through introspection, we can ask, how do we achieve insight into our own beliefs and attitudes and emotions? Well, we can think about them. And here's a good example. If you've ever found yourself in a, like one of these sleepless nights and you're on YouTube and you find yourself in a rabbit hole, just like out of nowhere, you're like, wait, what the hell am I watching here? Like, how did I get here? Right? And instead of hitting your back, the back, tab on your browser, you just start thinking in your brain, okay, well, I'm here, but then I came from that video, and then from there I was at this video. So you start kind of tracing your steps back, essentially, right? So introspection can involve some of that. You might say, like, why do I hate this person? Like, where are these feelings coming from, right? And you might say, okay, well, this is what happened. I remember that happening. And then, before that, it was this and that and so on and so forth. So we often do this type of introspection, this type of going back, tracing our steps, without even really realizing that we're doing it. So, of course, not all introspection is about tracing your steps forward or backwards. Sometimes introspection is just, thinking deeply, like, how do I feel about this? Like, how do I really feel about this? Am I really upset about this? Why am I really upset about it? So introspection can lead to some good insights, but there's a potential downfall in that most people tend to overestimate say the positive things about themselves or the positive things in their lives, because those things tend to be self-assuring, right? They make us feel good. So introspection, one of the major, say, limitations is that um, we're biased. We're biased in favor of ourselves, and not just biased in favor of trying to make ourselves, appear good. Then we're only just trying to prove it to ourselves. Instead, we're biased in the sense that we want to feel good about ourselves. One of the running themes we'll see throughout the class is that our brains actually do a pretty good job at deceiving ourselves, to make us feel better about ourselves, because low self-esteem is really detrimental to us. So we often do it unconsciously. There are plenty of techniques that we will use in order to make ourselves feel better. So another way to kind of, this is related to introspection. Another reason why introspection might not be the best way to kind of understand ourselves is that we tend to be really bad at what's known as affective forecasting. So, in other words, we have some difficulty predicting how we're going to feel in response to emotional situations that will occur in the future. So, I recently lost my mom, and it's only been, about 2 months now. And, the death of a parent is something that, as a child, I mean, as soon as we kind of understand what death is, that becomes like the ultimate fear, right? Like what's going to happen when our parents die? That doesn't necessarily, from my own experience, and not just my own experience, but my experience of friends and family. I'm at that age when these things start happening. But of course, that's one of the biggest fears that we have as a child, and we think like it's going to be unimaginably painful, that you're never going to be able to recover. But we're totally overestimating how bad it's really bad. I'm not gonna lie. But you tend to underestimate how resilient you are. So this comes with even, say, breakups of relationships and marriages. A lot of people are in really long-term horrible marriages because they're terrified of ending it, right? Because I'm just gonna feel so lonely, and I'll never find anyone who I'll love as much, or who will care for me as much. Or it's like, I just can't deal with that pain. But it also is related to positive things as well. So a lot of times, we think like, okay, I'll give you another example here, since I'm sharing my whole life story. For me, it's always like I've always kind of been chasing that good feeling, and that sounds a lot sadder than it is. But it's like, okay, so graduating from college, you might even think this too, right? It's like, okay, graduation day, it's just gonna feel so great, to finally complete this degree and like walk up there, get my diploma, or you have your name called, and just finally have that thing in your hand. And then the day comes and you're kind of like, okay, that's cool, but I thought I would be much more excited about this than I actually am. Okay, so that happened with me for high school and for college and for even my PhD. Like, the first time I was called Dr. Brown, I'm just like, okay. I totally thought that would be much cooler than it actually is, right? even happens with marriages, and this is like sometimes why people think they made a horrible mistake on their wedding day, right? Because people will think or spend years imagining like how happy their wedding day will be, how wonderful their wedding day will be, and then the wedding day comes and they're kind of just like, okay, that's so not as exciting as I thought it was. Maybe I made a horrible mistake. Maybe I'm not in love with this person, right? No, that's not it at all. We're just really bad at forecasting how things are going to affect us. So that should be a little bit of a consolation, right? It's like, okay, the things that you think are going to be really wonderful and make you happy probably aren't going to make you as happy as you think, but also the things that you are dreading that you think are going to be horrific and you'll never overcome, they're not going to be as bad either. So what are some of the reasons why we're so bad at effective forecasting? Well, one might be that we're underestimating our resilience, our coping mechanisms, like I said before, that we're not giving ourselves enough credit, at least in terms of the bad things that will happen in our lives. Also, another possibility is that we're focusing on a single event and neglecting the events of other life experiences, right? So it might seem so bad because that's all we're thinking about. But when the time comes, there's going to be other things going on in your life, and you're going to have lots of other experiences before that event occurs that will help you grow or help shape how you will respond. So, to be more accurate, it's better to think more broadly about life events, to think about the good and the bad, and the neutral aspects, the parts where, okay, it's something we'll deal with, we'll get through, instead of thinking, this will be the worst day of my life or the happiest day of my life. Try to think of events more broadly than say black or white, good or bad, something along those lines. Okay, so another way for us to let's say learn about ourselves or understand ourselves is through self-perception. So this involves learning about ourselves by observing our own behaviors. And we don't do this very often. Self-perception typically only kicks in when we're unsure what we think about ourselves or about a situation. So when there's ambiguity, so when we really don't know if we like somebody or not, as an example, we might say, yeah, I really don't know about that person. I don't know if I like them or not. What we might do is start noticing, how we talk to them. We might notice how we like interact with them in terms of, am I standing further away from them than I do other people, or am I standing closer to this person? So in ambiguous situations where we're really not sure about things, we might start looking at like what our bodies are doing and how we're behaving, as kind of giving us clues as to what's going on in our brains, right? Let me just take a sip of water here. I'm getting a tickle in my throat here. I'll be right back. Okay, so hopefully that doesn't come back. I've been spending this whole time trying not to cough. So where did I leave off? Okay, so when it comes to self-perception, again, we'll rely on our behaviors when the situation is ambiguous. There's also such a thing called vicarious self-perception, which means that when situations are, again, ambiguous, we're not really sure what we should think, or we're not really sure how we feel or about a particular situation, we might rely on other people's behaviors. We might see how other people are acting towards us, and we then make inferences or assign attributes. Like, okay, this person, I'm not really sure if this person likes me or not. So I'm going to look at how they're speaking to me, essentially. And then how they speak to me, I'm going to say, okay, yeah, they don't like me. They think I'm stupid, or they think I'm unqualified, or so on and so forth, right? So when we're not really sure about something, we'll rely on evaluating our own behavior, but we might evaluate the behavior of people that we would consider close to us, and that doesn't necessarily mean in a friendly way. Say your coworkers, some of whom you might not like at all, but you might try to make attributes or inferences about yourself based on how they're treating you. Another issue that comes up regarding self-perception, at least, is what's known as self-other knowledge asymmetry. This basically says that for some traits, some I don't want to say traits, some attributes, let's say, we're probably better than other people in terms of understanding ourselves. So something like introspection, not introspection, introversion. So if someone were to ask me if I were introverted or not, I would probably say, yeah, I'm probably more introverted than extroverted. But when it comes to, let's say, neuroticism, right? People would probably rank me as more neurotic than I would rank myself. Maybe not. I know I'm neurotic, but that's another story. So what's the difference there? Well, one of them is more internalized, right? This idea of, let's say like I keep saying it, introversion, right? People might have a hard time knowing that, because look what I do for a living. I teach for a living. I get in front of class. Well, I used to get in front of rooms full of people and just talk for a living, right? That's not something most introverted people, not something most people would associate with someone who's introverted. But I'm probably better at understanding that because it's more of an internal process, or more of an internal type of trait. Whereas something like neuroticism, say like, Brown, you're acting crazy, calm down. That's something that we that we don't always realize that we're engaging in, but it's something that other people would pick up, if that makes sense. So this is kind of where that asymmetry comes from, is that there are some things that we're probably better at assessing about ourselves, and then there are some things that other people are better at assessing about ourselves. And I can tell you that as a professor, as an educator, as a teacher, there have been a number of times where, I see amazing intellect, amazing potential in students, and they don't see it in themselves at all, right? Like students that I almost practically beg to, like, go to grad school, like at least apply, right? And they're like, yeah, no, I can never make it. I'm like, no, you can. Like, I know you can, because I went through all that shit, right? So, this is what we mean by that self-other knowledge asymmetry. What we think of ourselves, what others think of us, might not always match up. And, some of that could be accurate because we might have different we might be evaluating ourselves in ways that other people are not. They might be evaluating us on different criteria. Okay, I'm going to try to speed up. I just took a look at how much I'm talking here. So, where are we? Okay, one component of self-perception involves self-perception of emotions, right? So this is self-perception. Typically, when we talk about self-perception theory, we're talking about taking a look at our behaviors. But we can also, if we don't necessarily know how we think or how we should behave or how we necessarily feel in a given situation, we can also turn inward and think about how we're feeling at this particular moment. And part of this self-perception of emotions involves what's known as the facial feedback hypothesis. And this states that changes in facial expressions can lead to corresponding changes in emotion. So we'll talk about how emotion works in a bit here. But the idea behind it is that if you want to feel happy, then you should force yourself to smile, for example. Why? Well, because the muscles that are required for a smile, your brain knows when those muscles are activated. So even if you force a smile, your brain says, okay, well, we must be happy because we're smiling, right? If you, something like this, right? Kind of put on a sad face, your brain might say, oh, we're doing the sad face. This must mean that we're sad. So, and I've, like I said, the first day of class, I used to work in film and have a film major and all that. I did a little bit of acting and whatnot. But, a lot of people will think, oh, the easiest way to make yourself cry is to think of something really sad. That's not the easiest way to make yourself cry. The easiest way to make yourself cry is to first start fake crying. Like, just get that facial, those facial muscles associated with crying activated, and then your brain will take it from there. If you keep using a sad thought over and over to make yourself cry, it's going to become less and less sad over time. So you're going to need more and more horribly sad things to think about. Or you could just change what your face is doing. Now, I'm going to show you a video that briefly describes how this might work. But the facial feedback hypothesis is actually has come into question fairly recently, within the past couple years. So I'm not even sure if it's necessarily mentioned in your book. But there's some debate of whether or not this actually works. I can't say that it works for fake smiling. I say it worked for me for fake crying when I needed to cry on demand for, some film or video, TV thing that I was doing. But there's other expressive behaviors, such as our body posture, that could also influence our emotion. So, just sitting up straight, right? Straightening out your back will typically make you feel more confident, make you feel better. One thing that comes with being in lockdown for a year, right? Is that we're not really seeing other people, so we're some of us put on the COVID-19, which is worse than the freshman 15 and the grad school 30. But yeah, so we don't really feel the need to kind of gussy up or look our best. But actually gussying up, look your best, will often make people feel more confident, which makes us feel better. So even when it comes to doing, say, phone interviews, if you have a phone interview for a job, there's some research to suggest that, yeah, you should dress and prepare yourself exactly the way you would look as if this phone interview were going to take place in person. Just because of the way that you're looking and the way that you're going to be carrying yourself now will translate in terms of your confidence over the phone. Again, some of this research is being called into question, so just a disclaimer there. So let's take a look at a video of how this facial feedback hypothesis might work. Or not work. The research is to be determined now.
How's this? Is this a real smile? No? No? Okay, hang on. How about now? Hey everybody, Trace here, reporting for D News. Facial expressions aren't a mystery to most people. A smile means happiness, furrowed brows mean worry, frowns mean anger, but the science behind your facial features is way more complex than a smile means you're happy, because what if you're faking it, son? Smile means...
Hey, what happened there? I think that's where we were.
Anger, but the science behind your facial features is way more complex than a smile means you're happy, because what if you're faking it, son? Smile means happy, right? Not always. Researchers at the University of La Laguna point out that there are a wide variety of more ambiguous expressions that could also involve an upturned mouth. Just because we're smiling doesn't mean we're happy. See? I'm smiling right now, and I feel terrible today. A fake smile has been associated with everything from helping people get over stress to causing more stress. But can our brains even decode all the information required to spot a fakester? To find out, some researchers at the Canarian Institution created 3 studies determining whether we're good at guessing the fakes at all. The smile is like the nuclear bomb of okay, maybe that's wrong. It's just the most awesome of the facial expressions. When participants were asked to simply detect facial features, the smile overtook everything. Even if the smile was fake, they were perceived as happy. Then, when participants were asked to determine the emotional state underlying the expression, people still identified ambiguous expressions as happy 40% of the time. That's pretty close to flipping a coin to guess if someone's happy. It's not so great, brains. The clincher comes when people were asked if a facial expression containing a smile was simply positive or negative. Then they were pretty close to right on. It turns out it depends where you look. If humans look at the smile first before moving up to the eyes, the smile pollutes the whole facial expression. However, when we're looking to see how someone really feels, we will look at their eyes first and then move down to their smile. The eyes hold the answer. Looking at babies, we know that they can tell varying facial expressions as early as 15 months, processing the face of their parents and strangers and understanding what the emotional state might be. But this still begs the question, why do we even have facial expressions? A paper from the University of California, Santa Barbara says facial expressions are a declarative statement to those around us. Even when we're alone, we smile because of an imaginary social situation. You know, just making sure. The paper also warns not to tie facial expressions too closely with emotions. Animals, including humans, evolved these expressions as a tool for their needs. So for example, if a dog smiles, it may not be feeling what we experience as joy. It might just need attention or food. It has learned that when it makes that face, the smile face, it gets something it needs. Humans are the same. We recognize that there are reasons to give certain facial reactions. It's just a communication device. It can express our innermost thoughts, sure, but it can also just as easily hide them. And unless you look at the eyes, it turns out we're pretty easy to fool. So what do you think? Can you spot fake emotions? Do you use them to get what you want? Share your story in the comments below, and on your way down, go ahead and click subscribe so you get more D News every day.
Okay, so that guy actually raises a pretty good question there. Can we spot deception, essentially, right? How good are we at detecting deception? Well, we'll find out more in the next chapter. Short answer is we're not really good at all. And is largely because we typically pay attention to the wrong things when we're trying to detect deception. So it looks like I'm going to have to break this video into 2 parts. So just looking at the time here, let me see how much further I could get for part 1 of this lecture. So we can evaluate our own perceptions of emotion, but also we can evaluate our perceptions of motivation. So essentially what it is that is driving us to engage in certain behaviors or even feel certain ways, right? Sometimes emotions or even thoughts might have specific motivations behind them, but typically we're talking about behaviors here. So there are 2 major types of motivation. So basically, whatever your motivation is, it's going to be one of these. Either it's going to be extrinsic, meaning that it originates from outside of you. It originates from external factors, some external motivation, or it'll be intrinsic, meaning that it's coming from inside of you. So extrinsic motivation is, the reason why we go to work. Not go to work. It's the reason why we go to our jobs. So having a job and doing work is not necessarily the same thing, right? A job is something we do for money. And even if it's a job that you say, well, I would do it for free because I love it so much, well, it's probably better that you do it for free, because something that you love to do, as soon as that you love to do it, so it's originating from within you, it's an intrinsic motivation. So our hobbies, the things that we enjoy in life, you say, how wonderful would it be to, be able to do this for a living? You're not going to think that way very long. As soon as the motivation is changed, as soon as you now have a paycheck associated with it, now that you're, whether you have a house, a place to live or not, or whether you get to eat or not, is associated with whether you do this thing that you quote unquote love. I'll just say quote unquote because I'm pretty sure you used to love it. You're not going to love it anymore. This is what's known as the over-justification effect. So this is when expected rewards tend to lessen the effect of intrinsic motivation. So what does that mean? Well, again, when we're expecting something from doing something, now our motivation has shifted from something that was internal to something that is now external, that is now extrinsic, right? So I'll give you a quick, I say even my job is an example of this. And I said job because we get paid. If I could get paid and stay home or not work, I would certainly do that. I'll take a winning lotto ticket anytime. But I'm almost positive I would still at least adjunct a couple classes, right? I would do it for fun. I still teach for fun. And I'm almost positive that I would do that maybe after a year or two of kind of, getting away from job. And it's not even the teaching part of the job that is like really stressful to me. It's all the other stuff that comes with being a professor. It's like teaching is like 1/4 of my responsibilities. It's the endless meetings and the research aspect and all the service committee stuff that you have to do. You're just like, all right, enough of this. But I say this pretty confidently because there are professors who've taught 20, 30, 40 years. They retire, they disappear for a year or two, and then they come back and teach as an adjunct. They don't necessarily need the money. They're doing it now because teaching is intrinsically rewarding now, right? Clearly, I love to talk. I ramble on. And, if this were an in-person class, I'd love to see everybody's face and have you laugh or even roll your eyes at lame jokes that I make. I love all that stuff. But as soon as you put a paycheck, once you attach a paycheck to it, now it becomes a job. It doesn't, it loses the shine, so to speak. So everyone, gets that advice, and it's horrible advice, is that people will say, well, do something that you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Well, we know better than that because we're social psychologists, right? We have access to the literature and the research. And the research shows, you're not going to like that so much. So even people who say, how awesome would it be to get paid to taste test ice cream, right? I want to be an ice cream taste tester. How cool would that be? It'll be pretty cool for the first couple months or so, and then you're really gonna start hating ice cream, and you're gonna have to drag your ass out of bed to go to the ice cream factory to go taste these samples, and the commute, the drive there, you're gonna say, what am I doing with my life? Why did I decide to do? It's better just to keep things you love for yourself. And then my suggestion is find a job that you like, not love, right? Find a job that you like or that is manageable and pays really well. This job doesn't pay really well, so I need to like it. And I do, right? So the things I love, though, those are mine. No paychecks get attached to them. Okay, so let me just show you the overjustification effect in progress, right? This is one study here that was done. This is a pretty classic study where researchers gave 3 different groups of these were either preschoolers or kindergartners. 3 different groups were given a bunch of markers to play with, and the first group got 0 reward. So just playing with the markers and drawing, that was rewarding enough for these students. The second group of students, of children, got an unexpected reward. So they were told, here, just go play with these markers, have fun, play as much as you want with them. And then at the end, or halfway through, they say, hey, you've done such a great job playing with these markers. We're going to give you some cookies or some treat because you're doing such an awesome job. And then the third group were told at the beginning, the longer that you play with these markers, if you play with them for a long time, we're going to give you some cookies or a treat. Okay, so we have one group who got no reward at all. We got another group that got an unexpected reward, say halfway through. And then we got another group who was expecting a reward. What did we find in this study? Well, the group that got 0 reward played with their markers for what is that? 15, 16, 17 minutes or so. The group that got an unexpected reward saw a little bit of bump in terms of how long they were playing with these markers. Looks like, I have to guess, 17, 18 minutes-ish. But take a look at that third group. That's the overjustification effect in action, right? They played with those markers significantly less in terms of time compared to those 2 other groups. Why? Well, for the 2 other groups, playing with the markers was the reward, right? For this third group, playing with the markers was a mean to an end. The reward was the cookies or the treats. Playing with the markers was just a way to get to the treats. So again, when it comes to doing what you love for a job, doing what you love starts to becoming a way to get to be able to pay your bills and to pay your car loan and your student loans and put food on your table. It's much better to, again, save the things you love for you. They should be rewarding in and of themselves. Again, that last group, they still got to play with markers and draw for their cookies. So find a job that you can still have fun and do cool things with, but stuff you love should stay internal motivation. That last group was motivated by external factors. Okay, I'm going to stop here, take a break, and then we'll come back and do part 2 of this lecture. Okay, I'll see you in a bit.